There are days when the headlines around the 49ers feel scattered, but once you connect the dots, the behind-the-scenes picture starts talking loud in Santa Clara. The front office is leaving clues all over the board: protection for the future, possible aggressive moves in the middle of the defensive line, quiet tweaks on offense, and attention to a second layer of the roster that maybe not everybody is watching yet. And that is exactly what we are breaking down today, because these four stories do not feel random. They feel like pieces of the same setup. If you live and breathe 49ers football every single day, hit subscribe and come with me. Look at how the draft smoke starts to make sense when you stop looking only at the immediate need and start looking at what the 49ers may be trying to protect down the road. The possibility of San Francisco using pick 27 on an offensive lineman is not some tiny footnote. This touches the present, and even more importantly, the future of the franchise. It has been a long time since this team spent a first-round pick on the offensive line, all the way back to Mike McGlinchey in 2018, and when a pattern that long starts to wobble, you better pay attention to why. And the reason here feels pretty clear. This team still wants to compete hard right now without pretending a transition is not coming. That is where Kadyn Proctor enters the picture, and this needs to be crystal clear for the fan base. We are talking about a mock draft possibility, a projection from CBS Sports' Pete Prisco, not some locked-in insider report saying the name is already stamped in Santa Clara. But even as a projection, it says a lot. Because Proctor is exactly the kind of bet that splits a room in half. Massive ceiling, real risk, and very little guarantee of immediate impact. And that is usually where people freeze up. But honestly, I see a really interesting angle for the Niners here. If Trent Williams really does stay with the team, and the recent signs suggest there has been progress in that contract situation, then the whole picture changes. You would not be throwing a kid into the fire. You would be putting a high upside tackle behind a future Hall of Famer, letting him absorb technique, attitude, routine, and snap-to-snap discipline. And that was exactly Prisco's point. When Proctor is locked in, he can be dominant. The issue is consistency. Now think about this for a second. Is there a better place to sharpen consistency than inside a locker room that still sees itself in urgency mode, pressure mode, Super Bowl mode? The fair concern is obvious. Spending a first-round pick on someone who might not give you much right away can be hard to swallow, especially with other holes on the roster staring you in the face. But the draft room does not always scream immediate need. Sometimes it whispers succession. Sometimes it reveals that the front office is trying to win today without getting blindsided tomorrow. And for a team that depends so heavily on protection, physical dominance, and stability up front, that kind of thinking does not feel passive to me. It feels sharp. It feels like a franchise trying to stay big when the next changing of the guard finally arrives. Now the conversation jumps to a whole different level, because the name that hit the radar was Dexter Lawrence. And the same warning applies here. Do not turn possibility into fact. What exists right now is a speculative scenario after reports said the defensive tackle requested a trade during a contract standoff with the Giants. There is no confirmed negotiation with San Francisco. There is no finalized progress. But when a player at that level even appears to be available, the 49ers land in the conversation for one simple reason. This roster is still viewed as the kind of destination that can justify a massive swing. And that makes total sense. Lawrence is not some ordinary addition. He is the kind of defender who changes the shape of the line from the inside out, crushes the pocket, blows up timing, and changes how offenses build protection. A player like that does not just improve one position. He changes the whole temperature of a defense. That is why this story grabs so much attention. It is not only about adding talent. It is about imagining what Kyle Shanahan and this staff could do with a front that becomes even more violent, even more suffocating, even harder to survive up the middle. But that is exactly where the behind-the-scenes reality gets heavy. A move like that does not happen on pure adrenaline. The speculative package mentioned by Bleacher Report's Mo Moton would involve Brandon Ayuk, a 2026 second-round pick, and a 2026 fourth-round pick. And now the whole conversation gets serious in a hurry. Because you are not just talking about landing a monster in the middle. You are talking about giving up a major offensive piece, trimming draft capital, and then getting ready to absorb a huge contract on top of it. That kind of deal shakes the foundation. And that is the question that really matters for the fan base. How far are the 49ers willing to go to keep stacking force inside the defensive line after already making recent moves at the position? If that door ever swings open for real, this will not be some emotional impulse. This will be a choice about identity. Some news stories crash through the wall with sirens blaring, and some barely make a sound. But when you really study the fit, they hit harder than people realize. This tight end conversation is exactly that kind of story. Nobody is saying the 49ers are about to attack this position early in the 2026 draft. Actually, the read here is the opposite. This feels more like a mid-round or late-round move. And that matters because it reveals something very specific about the roster, not some generic obsession with adding bodies. Right now, the issue does not seem to be chasing another name for the headlines. The issue looks more like finding a tight end who can actually fill a role this room still has not fully solved. Jake Tongas gives you more as a pass catcher than as a blocker. Luke Farrell, meanwhile, did not deliver the impact that was expected in that blocking role last year. So what is the real message underneath this discussion? That San Francisco may be looking at the position not as a luxury, but as a fine-tuning correction inside the machine. And when the conversation is about fine-tuning in a 49ers offense, that is never some small detail. In this system, blocking on the edge, helping the run game breathe, assisting in protection, and still keeping a defense honest all tie into the identity of the offense. This is not just about finding a strong tight end. It is about finding somebody who allows the offense to stay multiple, physical, and unpredictable. That is where names like Oscar Delp enter the chat as possibilities, not decisions. The evaluation says he did not show a ton as a receiving threat, but he could bring real value as a blocker in the NFL, with athletic upside to grow. And in this context, that changes the conversation. What is really interesting here is that this is not a star hunt. It is a function hunt. It is a coaching staff staring at the board and asking, where is the machine still a little loose? Where can one less glamorous piece unlock the rest of the offense? When this kind of move hits, it almost never owns the headline that day. But a lot of times it shows up later, in the middle of the season, when you look at how the offense is functioning, and realize a key adjustment had been cooking long before anybody outside the building noticed. If you are reading this the same way I am, let me know in the comments. Would you rather see the Niners draft a blocking tight end, or trust this roster to solve that issue in-house? And here comes one of those behind-the-scenes reads that a lot of people miss because the top of the position looks solid. At first glance, you look at the linebacker room and the reaction is simple. Everything is fine. Fred Warner is expected back at full strength after his 2025 season got cut short by injury. Dre Greenlaw returns to anchor the heart of that unit, and there is still depth on the roster. But the draft is not built only to answer what is missing today. A lot of times it is built to stop the missing piece from showing up months later, when the market tightens and the roster starts shifting under your feet. That is exactly why the Bleacher Report read matters. Alex Ballentine pointed to linebacker as a sneaky need for San Francisco, especially with Garrett Wallow and D. Winters both set to hit free agency next offseason. And once you put that detail on the table, the topic stops sounding like a reach and starts sounding like prevention. The front office could be looking at that room and thinking one thing: the top is strong, but what about the support beams? What happens if the next wave needs to be rebuilt sooner than expected? The names mentioned help explain the kind of profile that could land on the radar. Anthony Hill Jr., for example, was framed as the ideal outcome because of the athleticism and the ceiling. Lander Barton shows up as a different kind of body type, with the potential to be disruptive in coverage. Justin Jefferson comes across as that lighter, more explosive linebacker who fits a mold the 49ers have liked before. None of these names are locked-in picks. We are talking about possible day 3 targets, fit-based projections, not confirmed draft plans. But the logic behind the list says a lot. It shows that San Francisco may be thinking beyond the loudest needs on the offensive line, defensive line, secondary, and wide receiver. It may be thinking about how to keep the defensive identity alive when the calendar flips, when contracts start tightening around the roster, and when depth has to become more than just good enough. This kind of story does not explode like a blockbuster. But inside the blueprint of a contender, this is exactly how a lot of important movement begins. When you step back and look at the full picture, what these stories really show is a front office trying to balance 2 pressures at once: keep the championship window breathing right now, and prepare the next move before urgency turns into panic. There is succession talk on the offensive line, heavyweight speculation on the defensive front, subtle adjustment on offense, and quiet attention on linebacker depth. None of that by itself finishes the story. But together, it all points to a team that is still moving, still studying, still trying to get ahead of the next shockwave. And that is exactly why draft season gets so hot around the 49ers.